On March 5th, 2022, a kid with a sporadic love for Thomas the Tank Engine created a YouTube channel. This YouTube channel went by the name as Oliver 11 Percy 6. He didn't upload an official video until July 13th, 2022, which is where we are today. He would upload a video series called Tom Shorts. And how did it do? Terrible. And how did his channel do? Terrible. He decided that since he was not getting views, he would no longer make videos on YouTube. The Tom Shorts series is no longer available to be viewed on YouTube.
One day, Thomas was at the quayside of a small village. Fish were being loaded into his cars. The work took a long time. The fishermen were using old equipment, and Thomas was worried. "I'm going to be late for Henry at the docks. He won't like this. Please hurry up." Thomas was rudely interrupted. His driver and fireman laughed. "Phew," sniffed Thomas. "What a pong!" He was glad when they were speeding along the beautiful coastal run. Then they saw a man waving a red flag. "What's the matter now?" "High tides are damaging the track," reported the man. "I've marked the spot." "We'll go and inspect," said the driver. "It would be dangerous for heavy engines like Henry," agreed the driver. "But for Thomas, it's safe enough." The guard left a red oil lamp by the damaged track to warn engines. "When we get to the docks, I'll tell them to close the line." Henry was waiting for Thomas's cars. "Pah! You're late. That smell is making me ill." "It's the fish," replied Thomas, "and there's danger on the rails. That's why we're late." "Ha! You're the only danger on the rails, Thomas. Now stop wasting time and get your cars hitched to my train." Thomas's driver and fireman were in the yardmaster's office when they heard Henry's whistle. He was steaming out of the station with his long, heavy train called the Flying Kipper. "What route is Henry taking tonight?" asked the driver. "The coastal run. It's the quickest." "But I told you," gasped the driver. "That's dangerous for a big engine like Henry." The yardmaster quickly phoned the signalman. Henry roared past the signal box. "I'll soon make up for lost time." The signalman couldn't hear the warning. By the time he did, Henry was far away in a cloud of steam. But when Henry reached the coastal track, his hopes for a fast run were dashed. Fog floated everywhere. "I can't see!" cried Henry. Nor could his driver. And when he could, it was too late. As soon as the tide was high enough, Henry was craned out of the water. Engines don't swim, Henry. You were meant to deliver fish, not swim with them. You should know that by now.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir.
When Henry arrived at the docks, Cranky the Crane looked down on him. My, Henry, I expect you'll have some fishy tales to tell. But take my advice, have a long hose down first. But there was worse to come. Look, they've caught all this fish and a green whale, too. It's not a whale, it's a monster. Henry was most upset. Thomas now felt sorry for Henry. Come on, your driver says it's time for a nice washdown. Then you'll feel much better. And Henry did.
I'm sorry I was rude to you, Thomas.
That's all right. But can you smell something?
What?
Fresh air.
Oh, yes,
replied Henry happily.
In December of 2022, Oliver 11 Percy 6 would begin to make videos again. Only this time, he actually knew how to edit. And also this time, he made YTPs. It was a very short-lived period of his career, and he no longer makes YTPs on the channel. Then he decided to move on and start making Playrail reviews. Those videos did okay, and then he moved on to Thomas and Friends remakes. This is where the fun began. This is what got him to where he is today. The Something in the Air remake that you just watched was the first video on his channel to get over 1,000 views.
Thomas, Percy, and James were looking at the early morning sky. Everyone's so much happier when springtime comes, said Thomas.
Everyone except Sir Topham Hatt, grumbled James. He seems to be working us harder than ever. I'm tired of these coastal runs.
He just wants everything to be ready for the holidays, replied Percy. Anyway, salty air makes me all cheerful in my smoke box.
Pah, snorted James. It's the countryside that really gets me fired up. It's the only place to be.
And he puffed away to collect his freight cars from the docks. Thomas and Percy had to take some empty freight cars to the scrap yards. In a siding, they saw an old coach. She looked very sad. What are you doing here? They called me Old Slow Coach and told me I wasn't useful anymore. Now only the mice ride in me. Well, you may be dusty, but you look in perfect shape. The yard manager appeared. Come along, I have freight cars for you to take away. Excuse me, said Percy's driver. Can you tell us about this coach? Old Slow Coach. She's been here for years. She'll be broken up when we find the time. The engines were dismayed. We'll try and help you, said Thomas. But he didn't know how. Meanwhile, James was enjoying himself.
This is the life,
he chortled. But he was heading for trouble. One of the fuel cars was leaking. Then, suddenly, it caught fire.
Oh, help!
cried James. They reached a siding, and his driver gave the alarm. It's fuel, and it's dangerous! As Thomas and Percy approached the junction, they saw the smoke and a guard waving a red flag. Sparks from James's funnel have set the cars ablaze, he called. The fire is under control, but it's quite a mess. You said the countryside got you all fired up, James, said Percy, but I didn't think you meant it in this way. Ha! Snorted James. It was the stupid car's fault, not mine. It's safe to proceed now, called a fireman. Thomas and Percy now felt sorry for James. It wasn't long before they reached the station. Later, as they were having a long drink at the water towers, they suddenly heard a commotion. What's the matter? Thomas asked. It's another fire at the workman's hut, replied Thomas's driver. We better see what we can do. fire engines had a big problem. "We are completely out of water," cried a fireman. "We can't use seawater because it clogs our works. You'll just have to let that building burn." Then Thomas had an idea. "Why don't you use the water in our tanks? We've just refilled them." The firemen wasted no time. "You're very clever engines," chuckled their drivers. Soon the fire was out, but the hut where the workmen lived was destroyed. "The men can't sleep on the beach," said the foreman. "What about old slow Coach? She would be perfect for the workmen," said Percy. "Comfy, too," added Thomas. "What a good idea, Percy," said his driver. They phoned Sir Topham Hatt, who agreed. "She'll be spick and span by the time you collect her." And she was, and very happy, too. "I can't thank you enough. I feel splendid." The engines buffered up to her, and she set off happily for her new home. Everyone agreed there was nothing old or slow about Coach, and she will always be really useful indeed.
So shortly after Oliver 11 Percy 6 uploaded his Something in the Air remake, he gained 100 subscribers. And shortly after he reached 100 subscribers, he rebranded to GreenTankEngine Productions. This was another new beginning for him, and he started to make remakes even more high quality and official looking.
One morning, Gordon was in the yard taking on a large supply of coal. "That's the third load of coal you've had today, Gordon," said James. "Some might say you're being rather greedy." "I'm an important engine," replied Gordon. "Important engines need plenty of coal, but I doubt if you would understand that, James." James snorted and went about his work. Later, Gordon was taking on water from a standpipe because the water tower was under repair. "I wouldn't drink too much of that water if I were you, Gordon. It might give you boiler ache." "Pah," said Gordon. "What's this, educating Gordon Day? First James, now you, Duck. Big engines have big needs. Little engines are just annoying." "Don't say I didn't warn you," laughed Duck. Later, Gordon steamed into the yard at the big station. "That's what I need," exclaimed Gordon. There, emerging out of the sheds, were two shiny tenders. "Now, if I had two tenders," said Gordon, "I wouldn't need to stop so often, and I wouldn't have to listen to silly little engines." "Those tenders belong to a visitor," replied his driver. Diesel sidled up alongside. "Everyone knows that tenders are a mark of distinction, but I'm afraid that no amount of tenders will save you in the end. We Diesels are taking over, and we don't need tenders to make us important, not even one." Gordon was most upset. He was feeling just the same next day. "I'm not happy." "I know," said Duck. "It's boiler ache." "It's not boiler ache," protested Gordon. "It's—" "Of course it is," interrupted Henry. "That water's bad. Have a good washout. Then you'll feel a different engine. Your boiler must be full of sludge." "Don't be vulgar," huffed Gordon. He backed down onto his train, hissing mournfully. "Cheer up, Gordon," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I can't, sir. Is it true what Diesel says, sir?" "What does he say?" "That Diesels are taking over." "Don't worry, Gordon. That will never happen on my railway." "One more thing, sir. Why did the visitor have two tenders?" "Because he lives on a railway with long distances between coaling depots." Gordon felt better. But Henry started complaining. He banged some cars angrily. "I always work hard enough for two," he puffed. "I deserve another tender." Duck whispered something to Donald. He was going to play a trick on Henry. "Henry," he asked, "would you like my tenders?" Yours? What have you got to do with tenders? All right, said Duck. The deal's off. Would you like them, Donald? I wouldn't deprive you of the honor, replied Donald. It is a great honor, continued Duck thoughtfully, but I'm only a tank engine. Perhaps James might. I'm sorry I was rude, said Henry hastily. How many tenders have you, and when could I have them? I have 6, and you can have them this evening. 6 lovely tenders, chortled Henry. What a splendid sight I'll be. Henry was excited all day. Do you think it will be all right? He asked for the umpteenth time. Of course, said Duck. They're all ready now. The other engines waited where they could each get a good view. But Henry wasn't a splendid sight at all. His 6 tenders were very old, dirty, and filled with boiler sludge. Had a good washout, Henry, called a voice. That's right. You'll feel a different engine now. Henry was not sure, but he thought the voice belonged to Gordon.
GreenTankEngine Productions was at its peak. He began making tons of subscribers every day and tons of views every day. Eventually, he did reach 200 and 300 subscribers. He stuck with that name for a couple of months, and then he rebranded to GreenTankEngine 11, which is his name now.
James is a mixed traffic engine. He can pull both freight cars and coaches. He's proud of his smart red paint, and so is his driver. Everyone says you brighten up their day, James. One morning, James whistled loudly at the other engines. Look at me. I am the smartest, most useful engine on the line. Rubbish, replied Thomas. We're all useful. Sir Topham Hatt says so, and he's head of the whole railway. You know what, James? Added Percy. What? Replied James. You're getting all puffed up. James huffed away. Later, he was still boasting. I'm the pride of the line. I saw you pulling freight cars, snorted Gordon. You're only a goods engine. I pull coaches, too. Not as much as I do. But Sir Topham Hatt has plans for me. James was only making this up, but Gordon believed him. What plans? Wait and see. Oh dear, he thought. Now what'll I do? Thomas was shunting shining new coaches. Good morning, James. Are those coaches for me? Asked James hopefully. No, these are for Gordon's Express. I'll fetch your freight cars next. But James was going to play a trick on the other engines. Actually, Thomas, I'm taking the coaches. Sir Topham Hatt asked me to tell you. What about the cars? Asked Thomas. Give them to Gordon. Come on, Thomas, said his driver. Orders are orders. So when James's driver returned, James was coupled to the coaches and he puffed away. Thomas returned with the freight cars, and a few minutes later, Gordon arrived. Where's the express? Thomas told him about James, and so here are your cars. Gordon was very cross, and so was his driver. Wait till Sir Topham Hatt hears about this. Meanwhile, James was enjoying himself enormously. What a clever plan! What a clever plan! He chuffed. Then he saw Sir Topham Hatt. Some jokes are funny, but not this one, James. You have caused confusion. Yes, sir, said James. You will now stay in your shed until you are wanted. The other engines teased James. I wonder who'll be pulling the express today, said Gordon. I expect it'll be you, replied Henry. James is stuck in the shed for being silly. James felt sad. Next morning, he went back to work. Hello, whistled Thomas. Good to see you out and about again. I'm sorry I tricked you, said James. Are these my cars? Yes, replied Thomas kindly. They are pleased to have you back. James set off to the harbor with his train of freight cars. He bustled about all day, pushing and pulling them into place. Time to go home now, James, said his driver at last. No cars or passengers, just we two. But his driver was wrong. Excuse me, called a man. I have a meeting with Sir Topham Hatt, and I mustn't be late. May I ride back with you? Of course, replied James's driver. Then he whispered to James, this gentleman is a railway inspector. James was most impressed. He steamed along the line as smoothly and quickly as he could. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting on the platform, and the railway inspector greeted him warmly. This clever engine gave me a splendid ride. You must be proud of him. Yes, indeed. Once again, you are a really useful engine.
He's a really useful engine, you know. All the other engines, they'll tell you so. He huffs and puffs and whistles, rushing to and fro. He's the really useful engine we adore.
It was May Day, and the engines were celebrating. They knew there'd be music and lots of fun. The station was being decorated. The Fat Controller said that the engines could be too. I'm going to have flags and streamers, whistled Percy. I'm going to have a big red banner, whistled Thomas. What decorations will you have, Gordon? Asked Murdoch. Decorations aren't dignified for an important engine like me. I pull the Express. Gordon was feeling insulted. Silly little engines, he grunted. Thomas was enjoying himself. He was bringing the maypole. The farmers' children waved, and Thomas peeped happily as he passed by. Soon it was time for the decorating. Percy's driver was wrapping streamers and flags around his funnel. Thomas had a big red banner on his tanks. Even Murdoch was being decorated, although he was very shy about it. "We could have a competition for the best-dressed engine," suggested James. Just then, Gordon shunted in. "A competition?" he puffed. "I'm bound to win any competition." "You'll have to be decorated," said James. "This is a best-dressed engine competition." "Not me," puffed Gordon. "You'd never catch me looking so ridiculous." The engines felt splendid. But not Gordon. He was cross. Decorations aren't dignified. Huh! Who cares about a competition anyway? Further down his line, a colourful banner was strung across the bridge. Then, as Gordon steamed across the bridge, it came loose and wrapped around his firebox. He couldn't see the line ahead. Gordon tried to whoosh the banner off, but the banner wouldn't budge. "I can't see," he whistled loudly to his driver. "Stop!" "You can't stop, Gordon," his driver called back. "You're the Express." Trevor the traction engine was chugging slowly along with his load of apples for the children's apple bob. Trevor heard a whistle. He was going as fast as he could, but it wasn't fast enough. The apples were all smashed. James was the last engine to join the competition, or so he thought. "Here comes Gordon!" cried the passengers. "We didn't think you wanted to be decorated," teased Thomas. "I didn't," puffed Gordon. "Well, he's definitely the best-dressed engine," said James. All the engines agreed. Gordon was secretly pleased, but he didn't think it was dignified to say so. Silly Gordon.
Have a race, let's see who is the quickest. Who can be the fastest? On your marks now, get set, go!
At night, when the other engines are tucked away in their sheds, you can still hear the faraway call of an engine's whistle and the clickety-clack of train wheels turning. This is the sound of the mail train. One train is pulled by Thomas and the other by Percy, as the loads are too heavy for one engine to do the work alone. The mail is loaded into freight cars at the harbors, and the engines pull their trains through the silent stations, delivering their precious loads. On a clear night, a big shiny moon brightens their journey, but often Thomas and Percy can't even see the stars. But whatever the weather, lamps along the track always light their way. One night, Percy was waiting at the junction. The main line train was late. At last, Henry arrived. "Sorry," he puffed. "The mail boat from the mainland was delayed." "Come on, Percy," said his driver. "Let's make up for lost time." Percy puffed along as quickly as he could, but the sun was already rising as he finished his work. Never mind, thought Percy. It's nice to be up and about when it's the start of a new day and there's no one else around. Percy was not alone for long. "Bother," said Percy. "It's that dizzy thing, Harold."
Good morning, whirred Harold. I always said railways were out of date, but you're so slow with the mail. You should give everyone their stamps back.
Percy was too tired to explain. "Bird brain," he muttered. "Good morning, Percy," called Duck. "You're up early this morning." "No, you're wrong," sighed Percy. "I'm back, tired and late." He rolled into the shed and fell asleep almost before his buffers touched the bar. His driver decided to set off early that evening. Thomas was waiting at the station. "Thank goodness I have a chance to speak to you. Driver says that the person in charge of the mail has complained to Sir Topham Hatt about the delay last night." "But that wasn't my fault," replied Percy. "I know," said Thomas, "and so does Sir Topham Hatt. But this mail person wouldn't listen. Tonight we'll just have to be quicker than ever before." The engines were just leaving when they heard a familiar buzzing.
I say, you two, there's news flying about.
"Where?" puffed Percy crossly.
All over the place. They're going to scrap the mail train and use me instead. Wings work wonders, you know. Always.
"Rubbish," huffed Thomas. That night, everything ran like clockwork. Thomas and Percy steamed through the stations, making good time everywhere they went. At a station, Thomas noticed a man looking cold and worried. He had missed his train home. "We can give you a ride," said Thomas's driver, "but it will be rather uncomfortable." "Thank you," said the man. "Anything's better than sitting here." The next afternoon, Percy passed the airfield and saw Harold. "Hello, Lazy Wings. Are you too tired to fly today?"
The wind's too strong, grumbled Harold. I've been grounded.
"You need rails," laughed Percy. "They work wonders, you know. Always." That night, Sir Topham Hatt showed the two engines a letter. It was from the man who missed his train. "He thinks you are both splendid, and everyone says that the mail train is the pride of the line."
Oliver and his brake van Toad liked working in the big yards, but one morning Toad noticed that Oliver was unhappy. He decided to find out why. Excuse me, Mr. Oliver. It seems to me that things are not well with you, if you forgive me for mentioning it. You're quite right, Toad. All I do is shunt these freight cars onto the turntable. I long for a nice run. It's what an engine really needs. Quite so, Mr. Oliver. May I suggest that you speak to Sir Topham Hatt about your problems? But Oliver said nothing. He just grew unhappier, and he was rough with the freight cars. You're no good, Oliver. You're dangerous. We want Percy. Percy's far too busy to be bothered with the likes of you. And Oliver bumped the freight cars hard. "You silly engine," shouted a workman. "It'll take a long time to repair this turntable, which will cause confusion and delay." That night, Sir Topham Hatt arrived. "Oliver, you have caused confusion. I thought you could control freight cars. You shall work the mail train for a while. Maybe the night air will clear your smoke box." "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir," said Oliver sadly. "Cheer up, old chap," said his driver. "The mail train run is a grand run for a fine engine like you." Oliver smiled, but he still felt he had let everyone down. His driver took them along the coastal run with the mail train. The fresh air couldn't help but brighten Oliver's spirits. They made good speed until it was time to collect some important mail from Harold the helicopter. "Come on, Harold!" At last, Harold landed. "Sorry I'm late, Great Western. Had a bit of a problem with one of my arms. Kept letting me down when I was meant to be up. You know how it is." "We know that we'll be late for our first run," replied Oliver's driver. Soon they were on their way again. Ahead was a red signal light. Oliver didn't realize that the signalman had dozed off. Oliver whistled several times, but the signal stayed red. "There must be something wrong with that signal. We'll go slowly and stop by the signal box," said his driver. But they never reached it. The points before the signal box were switched to an old track. They were going the wrong way. Oliver's fireman was concerned. "We need to find a water tower soon." Instead, they saw an old station. Disaster lay ahead. Meanwhile, Sir Topham Hatt was worried. "Oliver has not returned. We'll send out a search party." Soon he was high in the sky with Harold. There they are. It wasn't Oliver's fault, sighed the driver. I'm aware of that. I'm just glad to see you are all safe. Then he saw something. It was an empty old house beside the station. He went to inspect it. When he returned, he spoke to Oliver. You have found another attraction for our island. We'll make this house as good as new, and visitors can have tea and crumpets there. Sighed Oliver. Getting lost can be interesting, but being found is much nicer. Especially when it makes an engine feel really useful.